The first time I saw Corporal Maya Torres lose her temper, 3 training dummies ended up embedded in the reinforced wall of Deck 7. The second time, I made sure to stand very, very far away. My name is Velkir, and I serve as a tactical analyst aboard the Galactic Defense Coalition's flagship, the Redemption's Edge. I've seen combat across 17 systems, witnessed the brutality of the Kresh invasion, and survived a planetary siege that lasted 8 rotations. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for humans. Specifically, one human. Torres stood at barely 6 feet tall, which made her average by human standards but positively tiny compared to most species in the Coalition. She had dark hair pulled back in what humans called a regulation bun, brown eyes that seemed to catalogue everything, and a smile that could shift from friendly to absolutely terrifying in less time than it took my primary heart to beat. She was also, for reasons that baffled every single member of command, emotionally attached to her training squadron. They're not just cadets, she'd told me once, while we shared a meal in the commissary. They're my pack. Pack. Such a strange word, such a human word. I'd watched her train them for 6 cycles, watched her push them harder than any instructor I'd ever seen, watched her celebrate their victories and rage at their failures. The squadron consisted of 7 individuals from different species, 2 Vrellish shock troopers, a Hanthian pilot, 3 Corvax engineers, and 1 absolutely terrified Plenary medic named Silix, who looked like he might faint every time someone raised their voice. Torres loved them all with the kind of fierce, protective intensity that made the rest of us deeply uncomfortable. "She's going to get herself killed," Commander Thrace had muttered during one observation session. The Corvax officer watched through the viewing window as Torres personally demonstrated a close-quarters combat technique that involved breaking 3 of her own fingers. She'd reset them herself, then continued the lesson. Humans don't understand appropriate emotional distance. He was right, of course. Humans didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. That became abundantly clear during the arena trials. The trials were a coalition tradition, designed to test squadron cohesion under extreme stress. Teams entered a modified combat arena where they faced increasingly difficult scenarios over a 48-hour period. The scenarios weren't meant to be pleasant. They were meant to break you down, expose your weaknesses, and rebuild you into something stronger. Most species handled the trials with cold efficiency. The Corvax treated it like a military exercise. The Vrellis approached it as a test of individual prowess. The Hanthians viewed it as a statistical challenge to be calculated and overcome. Humans took it personally. I was monitoring from the control deck when Torres's squadron entered the arena. They looked confident, prepared. Torres had spent the last rotation drilling them mercilessly. Silix still looked terrified, but he moved with more purpose now. The Vrellis troopers, Grax and Thorn, flanked the formation with weapons ready. Pilot Kellen, the Hanthian, kept his secondary eyes on the overhead sensors while his primary eyes scanned forward. The first scenario activated, a simulated ambush in urban terrain. They handled it beautifully. Torres called out positions, adjusted their formation on the fly, and personally dragged one of the Corvax engineers out of the line of fire when he froze up. Watching her work was like watching a conductor lead an orchestra. Every movement had purpose, every decision flowed naturally. "Impressive," Thrace admitted. "Perhaps the humans' methods have merit after all." The second scenario launched before they'd finished catching their breath. Hostage extraction under heavy fire. This is where things started going wrong. The scenario designers had made the hostages look disturbingly realistic. One of them was even programmed to sound like Silix's clutch sister. The Plenary medic hesitated for half a second too long, and the simulation punished him for it. Neural disruptors fired, hitting him square in the chest. He went down hard. Torres moved before anyone else even processed what happened. She covered the distance between her position and Silix in 3 seconds flat, sliding on her knees to reach him, while return fire sparked off her shield generator. She checked his vitals, shouted something that made Grax and Thorn form a protective barrier, and personally carried Silix to cover. The scenario ended. Silix was alive but shaking badly. Torres held his hand, speaking quietly to him while the rest of the squadron regrouped. "That was inefficient," one of the observation officers commented. "She should have prioritized the objective." I didn't respond. I was watching Torres's face, watching the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes went cold. The third scenario should have been routine, defensive positioning against waves of attackers. It wasn't routine. Later, we discovered that someone had tampered with the difficulty settings. Someone had decided that Torres's squadron was performing too well, that they needed to be humbled. So the scenario that should have involved standard combat drones instead deployed advanced war machines, the kind we used against actual enemy combatants, the kind that could kill. The first volley of real ammunition tore through Kellen's wing. The Hanthian pilot went down screaming, and the sound that came out of Torres's throat wasn't human. It was something older, something primal. "Medic!" she roared, but Silix was already moving, his fear forgotten in the face of his friend's pain. The war machines advanced. They moved with mechanical precision, their weapons tracking, their sensors locked. This wasn't a simulation anymore. This was an execution. Grax took rounds to his armor plating. It held, barely, but the impact sent him sprawling. Thorn tried to return fire and had his weapon shot out of his hands. The Korvax engineers scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist. And Torres stopped retreating. "Velkir," Thrace said quietly beside me. "Shut it down." "I'm trying." The tech officer was frantically working his console. "The system's locked. Someone's overridden the safety protocols." Down in the arena, I watched Torres assess the situation in the span of a heartbeat, watched her see her pack, her squadron, her people being systematically destroyed, watched something in her eyes shift from fear to calculation to absolute, unwavering fury. She pulled 2 plasma charges from her belt. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Torres armed both charges, looked directly at the nearest war machine, and smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I've ever seen on any being in my entire life. Then she charged, not away, toward. The war machine's targeting system probably didn't know what to do with a target that was actively running at it with live explosives. Torres closed the distance before it could adjust, slapped both charges onto its chassis, and dove behind its legs. The explosion took out the machine and 2 others behind it in a chain reaction of shrapnel and fire. Torres rolled to her feet, her uniform smoking, and grabbed the weapon from a destroyed machine. She spun, fired 3 times, and eliminated another target that had been lining up a shot on Silix. "Somebody open that door!" Thrace was shouting now. "Get them out of there!" But Torres wasn't trying to escape. She was advancing. She moved through the arena like something out of ancient human mythology, the kind of stories they told about warriors who fought gods and won. Every movement was efficient. Every shot found its mark. When she ran out of ammunition, she picked up debris and used it as a weapon. A war machine got close enough to swing at her with its combat blade. Torres ducked under the strike, drove her fist into its sensor cluster, and used its own momentum to flip it over. She stomped on its core processor until it stopped moving. The remaining machines began to recalculate. I could see it in their movement patterns. They'd been programmed to fight soldiers, not whatever Torres had become. They started to retreat, and she followed them, hunted them, eliminated them one by one with methodical, terrifying precision. The last war machine went down under a piece of structural debris that Torres had somehow pried loose and dropped on it from above. Then silence. Torres stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by destroyed machines and scattered ammunition casings. Her chest heaved with exertion. Blood ran down her temple from a cut above her eyebrow. Her hands were shaking. She turned and ran back to her squadron. "Kellen? Kellen, talk to me." She dropped beside the Hanthian pilot. Silix was already working on him, his hands steady despite the chaos. "How bad?" "Wing damage, possible fracture, but he'll live," Silix reported. His voice cracked only slightly. "Thanks to you." Torres checked each member of her pack, touched them, spoke to them, made sure they were alive. When she'd confirmed everyone was breathing, she slowly stood and looked directly at the observation deck. Directly at us. Her expression made several officers take an involuntary step backward. "Open the door," Thrace ordered quietly. "Now." The arena door slid open. Torres didn't walk out. She stormed out, trailing smoke and fury. Her squadron followed as best they could, Grax and Thorn supporting Kellen between them. I met them at the entrance to the medical bay. "Corporal Torres," I began. She brushed past me without a word. Her entire focus was on getting her people to treatment. She stayed with each one as the medical staff evaluated them, refusing to leave until she knew their conditions. Only when the last of her squadron was stable did she finally turn to acknowledge me. "Someone," she said very quietly, very calmly, "tried to kill my pack. It was a malfunction," I started. "No." Her eyes locked onto mine. "It wasn't. Someone switched live weapons into a training scenario. Someone overrode the safety systems. Someone decided that 7 lives were acceptable losses. She wasn't wrong. We'd already pulled the logs. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the arena systems. We'll investigate, I promised. We'll find whoever's responsible. You'd better. Torres took a step closer. Because if you don't, I will. And when I find them, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. It wasn't a threat. Threats implied uncertainty. This was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the kind of cold certainty that made my survival instincts scream. Torres turned and walked away, heading toward the showers. She left bloody footprints on the clean floor. Commander Thrace appeared beside me, watching her go. She killed 7 war machines in under 10 minutes, he said slowly, with minimal equipment, while protecting 6 wounded squad mates. Yes, sir. That's not possible. Apparently no one told the human that. Thrace was quiet for a moment. The investigation will find answers. Make sure it does. I nodded. I'd already started compiling data, tracking access logs, identifying everyone who'd had contact with the arena systems in the last cycle. But part of me wondered if our investigation would even matter, because Torres had made it very clear that she was conducting her own investigation. And unlike us, she didn't have to follow coalition protocols. She didn't have to respect chain of command. She just had to protect her pack. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it made me deeply, profoundly nervous. Because somewhere on this ship, someone had hurt Torres's pack, had tried to kill them, had almost succeeded, and now they'd have to answer for it. Not to the coalition, not to command. To Maya Torres. I remembered those 3 training dummies embedded in the wall of Deck 7, remembered the smile on her face right before she'd charged 7 war machines with nothing but plasma charges and rage. Whoever was responsible was about to discover something the rest of the coalition was only beginning to understand. Humans weren't dangerous because they were strong or fast or particularly clever. They were dangerous because they loved. And nothing in the galaxy was more terrifying than what a human would do for the ones they loved. The next morning, 3 senior officers requested immediate transfer off the Redemption's edge. Commander Thrace denied all 3 requests with what I can only describe as malicious satisfaction. "You want to leave," he'd said, loud enough for half the command deck to hear. "After someone nearly murdered 7 cadets under your watch? Absolutely not. You're all staying right here until we figure out who's responsible." Smart move. Whoever had sabotaged the arena would likely panic and make mistakes if they couldn't run. I found Torres in the training gymnasium at 0400 hours. She was alone, systematically destroying a heavy bag with strikes that would have killed most organic beings. Her knuckles were wrapped in medical tape. Sweat dripped down her face. She didn't acknowledge my presence. "Your squadron is asking for you," I said after watching for several minutes. "Kellen is awake." Torres landed one final strike that nearly tore the bag from its mounting. "How's his wing?" "Pinned and stabilized. He won't fly combat missions for 6 weeks, but full recovery is expected." She grabbed a towel, wiped her face, and finally looked at me. The cold fury from yesterday had crystallized into something harder, more focused. "You found anything?" "Access logs show 17 people had authorization for arena systems. We've narrowed it to 5 with the technical knowledge to override safety protocols." "Names?" I hesitated. "Torres, you need to let the investigation proceed through proper channels." "Velkir," she said my name the way you'd identify a particularly slow child. "Someone tried to murder my people. Proper channels can run parallel to my own inquiries. Now give me the names before I access the system myself." She would too. Humans had an alarming aptitude for breaking into systems they weren't supposed to access. Something about their pattern recognition abilities and complete disregard for rules when sufficiently motivated. I transferred the data to her personal device. 3 Korvax technicians, 1 Vrelis systems operator, and Lieutenant Rask. Torres's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. Rask, the tactical instructor who called my training methods soft, the same. Lieutenant Rask had been vocal about his disdain for Torres's approach. He believed proper military training required emotional detachment, rigid discipline, and what he called acceptable attrition rates. He'd filed formal complaints about Torres 3 times in the last cycle. "He didn't approve of you bonding with your squadron," I added unnecessarily. "No, he didn't." Torres checked her chronometer. "Where is he right now?" "His quarters, presumably." "But Torres, you can't just confront a superior officer without evidence." She smiled that terrifying smile again. Watch me. I should have stopped her, should have contacted Thrace, followed protocol, done literally anything except what I actually did, which was follow Torres through the corridors like a particularly anxious shadow. We found Rask in the officers' mess, eating breakfast with 2 other instructors. He was a massive Vrelis, built like a mobile fortress, with the kind of scars that spoke to decades of combat experience. He saw Torres approaching and deliberately turned his back. "Lieutenant Rask, Torres," said pleasantly. "Might I have a word?" "Corporal Torres." He didn't look up from his meal. "If you're here to complain about yesterday's incident, save your breath. Training scenarios are designed to be unpredictable." "Unpredictable." Torres pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "Is that what we're calling attempted murder now?" The other 2 instructors suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Rask finally looked at her, his multiple eyes narrowing. "Careful, Corporal. You're addressing a superior officer." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm addressing someone who thinks sending live ammunition into a training exercise is acceptable." Torres leaned forward. 7 war machines, Rask, with real weapons, against cadets. I had nothing to do with that malfunction. Funny thing about malfunctions, Torres pulled out her datapad. They leave traces, digital fingerprints, access timestamps. And according to the logs I definitely obtained through proper channels, someone with your credentials accessed the arena system approximately 2 hours before my squadron's trial. Rask's expression shifted slightly, just enough for me to notice. My credentials are used by multiple officers. Anyone could have logged in as me. True. But not anyone could have bypassed the secondary authentication that requires biometric verification. Torres tapped her datapad. Your biometric verification, your retinal scan, your genetic signature. You're fabricating evidence. Am I? Torres stood slowly. Then you won't mind submitting to a formal investigation. Complete system audit, full interrogation, unless you'd like to save us all some time and explain why you decided my squadron needed to die. The mess hall had gone very quiet. Other officers were watching now, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Rask stood as well, towering over Torres by at least 3 feet. Your methods are dangerous, Torres. You teach cadets to care about each other, to form emotional attachments. That kind of weakness gets people killed in real combat. So you decided to prove your point by trying to kill them yourself? I decided to show them what real combat looks like. Rask's voice rose. 7 machines against 7 cadets. Those are generous odds compared to actual warfare. They needed to learn that feelings don't matter when someone's shooting at you. They learned something, all right. Torres didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. They learned that even when facing impossible odds, even when someone betrays them, even when they're wounded and terrified, they can still survive. Because they're not just individuals following orders. They're a pack. And we don't abandon pack. Sentiment, weakness, Rask sneered. You humans and your pathetic emotional bonds. It's going to get you all killed. Torres nodded slowly. Maybe, but not today. She looked past Rask to where Commander Thrace had appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 security officers. Commander, Lieutenant Rask just confessed to sabotaging the arena systems and endangering 7 cadets. I heard. Thrace's expression was unreadable. Lieutenant Rask, you're relieved of duty pending formal charges. Surrender your credentials. Rask's eyes went wide. He'd been so focused on Torres that he hadn't noticed half the mess hall recording the conversation on their personal devices. Coalition military law was very clear about conduct unbecoming an officer. Deliberately endangering cadets under your command, that was a court-martial offense at minimum. You set me up, Rask said slowly. No, Torres met his gaze steadily. You did this to yourself the moment you decided my pack was expendable. I just made sure everyone else knew about it. Security moved in. Rask didn't resist, but as they led him past Torres, he stopped. You think you've won something here? You think your emotional attachments make you strong? Wait until you lose one of them, Torres. Wait until you watch someone you care about die because you taught them to feel instead of fight. Then you'll understand. Torres didn't flinch. Maybe, but at least I'll know they died surrounded by people who loved them. Not alone because their instructor taught them that caring was weakness. They took Rask away. The mess hall remained silent. Thrace approached Torres. That was either very brave or very stupid, Corporal. Probably both, sir. You obtained those access logs illegally, didn't you? I have no idea what you're talking about, sir. Thrace almost smiled. Of course not. Dismissed, Corporal. Go check on your pack. Torres saluted and left. I followed because at this point, what else was I going to do? We found her squadron in the medical bay, all of them clustered around Kellen's bed despite the medical staff's protests. They were laughing about something, their voices overlapping in the easy way of people who'd survived something terrible together. They saw Torres, and the entire mood shifted. Not to fear or respect or military formality, to something warmer. Grax pulled up a chair for her. Thorn offered her food from the commissary. Silix showed her his medical certifications, earned after he'd successfully treated Kellen under combat conditions. We heard you found who did it, Kellen said, his voice scratchy but strong. Heard you made him confess in front of half the officer corps. Rumors travel fast. So do recordings. One of the Corps's engineers held up his datapad, showing footage of Torres's confrontation with Rask. You're kind of famous now. The human who took down a lieutenant with nothing but access logs and attitude. Torres shrugged. He hurt my pack. Had to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Your pack. Grax repeated the word slowly. We looked up what that means in human culture. It's more than just a team, isn't it? Yeah. Torres looked at each of them in turn. It's family. The kind you choose. The kind you protect no matter what. Silix, the terrified plenary medic who'd frozen during their first scenario, straightened in his seat. We choose you too. All of us. We talked about it while you were hunting Rask. You're not just our instructor, you're our pack leader. Pack leader. Torres tested the words. I like that better than corporal anyway. They spent the next hour together, not training or drilling or preparing for the next mission, just existing in the same space, sharing stories and terrible commissary food and the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from trust. I watched from the doorway, taking notes for my report. Thrace appeared beside me, also observing. You know what the interesting thing is? He said quietly. Rask was right about one thing. Emotional attachment is dangerous. It does make you vulnerable. Sir? But he was wrong about it being weakness. Thrace gestured toward Torres and her squadron. Look at them. 7 individuals who barely functioned as a unit 6 cycles ago. Now, they moved through that arena like extensions of the same organism. They fought harder, adapted faster, survived impossible odds. Not despite their emotional bonds, because of them. With respect, sir, that's not standard military doctrine. No, it's not. Thrace smiled slightly. It's human doctrine. And maybe it's time we started paying attention. The formal investigation took 3 more days. Rask was court-martialed, stripped of rank, and permanently expelled from Coalition service. The arena systems were completely overhauled with new safety protocols that required triple verification before live weapons could be authorized. Torres's squadron became something of a legend on the ship. Other instructors started quietly adopting some of her methods. Not all of them. They weren't quite ready to fully embrace the human approach, but enough. More emphasis on unit cohesion, more attention to individual needs, less tolerance for the kind of emotional detachment that had nearly gotten 7 cadets killed. 6 weeks later, Kellen was cleared for flight duty. Torres took her squadron back into the arena for a voluntary trial. No one had ordered them to go back. No one expected them to want to. But they went anyway. I watched from the observation deck as they moved through scenarios with the kind of synchronized precision that took most squads years to develop. They trusted each other implicitly, moved like they could read each other's minds. When Silix hesitated, Grax was already covering his position. When Thorn went down with a simulated injury, the Corps's engineers had him extracted before Torres even finished calling the order. They passed every scenario, set new records for speed and efficiency, and when they emerged from the arena, they were laughing, celebrating, embracing each other with the kind of joy that made several officers uncomfortable. Torres caught my eye through the observation window. She nodded once, a simple acknowledgement. I nodded back. Later, I filed my final report on the incident. Command wanted to know if human training methods should be adopted fleet-wide. My recommendation was carefully worded, professionally detached, and thoroughly documented. But the real conclusion, the one I didn't write down, was simpler. Humans were dangerous not because they were warriors or survivors or any of the other qualities we'd identified. They were dangerous because they transformed everyone around them, made them stronger, fiercer, more resilient, turned collections of individuals into something greater, into packs. And you really, really didn't want to hurt a human's pack. Torres rotated off the Redemption's edge 8 cycles later, promoted to sergeant, and assigned to train instructors at the Coalition Academy. Her original squadron requested transfers to follow her. All 7 requests were approved. Rask, last I heard, was working maintenance on a mining colony at the edge of explored space. Alone. No squad, no pack, no one to care if he lived or died. Seemed fitting, really. Sometimes I still see recordings of Torres in that arena, charging war machines with nothing but fury and determination, and absolute, unshakable love for her pack. The footage has been analyzed by tactical experts across the Coalition, broken down into individual movements, studied for lessons that might be replicated. They're missing the point. You can't replicate what Torres did that day because it wasn't about technique or training or even courage. It was about being human, about loving so fiercely that you'll walk through fire to protect what matters. The rest of us are still trying to figure out if we're brave enough to follow her example. But we're learning. Slowly, carefully, we're learning to build our own packs.